Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my new series, WoW to 14. Over the years, I've had plenty of World of Warcraft players ask me several specific questions about Final Fantasy XIV in an attempt to determine if they should make a switch. While the two are very clearly the same style of MMO, there are a lot of core differences in how the two function. This series will be focused on covering those differences so you can determine if making the switch over is a good move for you or not. Also, before we get started, big shout out to KlopsGG for donating some World of Warcraft footage so that I could properly make this video since I don't have a current subscription right now. You can find a link to his Twitter and Twitch in the description, and he just started doing a Final Fantasy XIV podcast on Thursday, so be sure to check that out as well. Please keep in mind my expertise is more on Final Fantasy XIV, as my last experience with World of Warcraft was between Burning Crusade and Early Cataclysm, with breaks in between. I'll do my best to keep this subjective and show no bias towards either game. And if you're someone who plays 14, maybe use this as an opportunity to understand World of Warcraft a little bit better. The first topic this series will cover is the one I've been getting asked about most recently, combat. More specifically, how does the global cooldown work in Final Fantasy XIV? For those watching who may be trying to decide between the two MMOs as a new player, the global cooldown is a term used to describe a timer that must be waited out between the vast majority of skills. In other words, any button placed on the global cooldown, or GCD for short, will make it so any other skills that are on the global cooldown will not be able to be used until the timer is up. There are also skills not placed on the GCD, known as off global cooldowns or OGCDs. These skills can be used independently of the GCD and have their own separate cooldown timers. In both games, both of these types of skills exist, but the way you interact with them is quite different. First, let's talk about World of Warcraft. Global cooldowns in World of Warcraft are at base 1.5 seconds for most classes, though several classes do have a shorter GCD than this or can reduce it with the haste stat. Even on classes with 1.5 second GCDs, some skills still trigger a shorter global cooldown than other skills. In the case of classes with casting speeds, this number can range anywhere from instant to longer than the GCD itself. For example, Warlock Shadowbolt triggers a 1.5 second global cooldown, but takes 2 seconds to cast. This speed often leads to people feeling World of Warcraft has faster and more visceral combat, where you're constantly seeing the output of your actions when you press a button. While most animations are quite basic due to this, they are also incredibly responsive and can be used reactively more reliably. Skills on the off global cooldown all have their own timers, occasionally shared with other skills. There are items with cooldowns as well, and maximizing the use of these skills in World of Warcraft alongside your GCDs is key to the flow of combat and your role's output, especially those with sub 1 minute cooldowns. A note about World of Warcraft: the reason the global cooldown has become such a hot topic recently and prompted me to make this video and series is due to several changes that recently appeared on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha servers. Several abilities were placed on the global cooldown, such as offensive and defensive cooldowns and even movement skills. While this change is not final, nor has it been tuned properly even if it is final, several players have shared concerns with me about this. Apparently they shared enough concerns with Blizzard to actually get the movement skills taken back off the global cooldown, or at least that's planned for a future alpha patch as of the recording of this video. Again, I haven't played World of Warcraft in quite some time, so how this affects the flow of combat or the in-moment decision making for PvE and PvP in that game isn't abundantly clear to me. I'm only stating that this change is currently present on their alpha. If you're someone who has experience with it, feel free to comment below and give those who don't know about it a little bit more insight. For Final Fantasy XIV, the global cooldown for all jobs is set to 2.5 seconds at base, considerably longer than World of Warcraft. This timer applies to almost all abilities titled weapon skills or spells, with a few exceptions. This timer can be reduced through stats on armor called skill speed for weapon skills and spell speed for spells. Several jobs have buffs that decrease this timer, such as Monk's Grease Lightning buff that they try to keep applied at all times. Additionally, job skills that give party members increased haste, such as the Astrologian's Arrow card, speed up the global cooldown as well. These stats also reduce the cast time for skills that have them. Like World of Warcraft, skills with cast times can range from instant to even longer than the global cooldown. An example would be Black Mage's Fire 4, which has a 2.8 second cast time against the 2.5 second GCD. Due to the much longer global cooldown, Final Fantasy XIV takes this time to incorporate elaborate animations for its skills. However, I find them to be much less responsive on average, leading to moments where you might try to activate something important at the very last second and find you were just a hair too late. It also leads to the earlier levels of the game feeling much slower, pushing away players who might be looking for something a little bit faster paced. At the later levels, you will find you have many more off global cooldown abilities to fill between your global cooldowns. This is partially why the global cooldown is so long, to leave ample time between your skills to activate off global cooldown abilities. Off global cooldowns range from personal buffs to damaging skills to movement abilities, pretty much anything that isn't your basic skill combo. Tracking all of these can be quite the busy work, as rotations for many jobs involve the intricate weaving of abilities between your global cooldown. Some jobs have over 20 skills they'll use in the first half a minute of a fight alone, and the order of these skills often has lasting impact on how they line up with the boss's rotations and your other skills and raid utilities for the rest of the party. It can be quite overwhelming for newer players, especially those who opt to skip right to the higher levels via the leveling jump potion. Additionally, almost all global cooldowns and off global cooldowns have a nearly 0.5 second activation period after the skill is executed when you cannot activate another skill. This means that within that 2.5 second period of time, you can optimally fit 2 off global cooldowns in there. Jobs with innate haste buffs they maintain will often find themselves only comfortably fitting a single off global cooldown between their global cooldowns. This makes quick execution key, as delaying your GCD inevitably slows down the pace of your job's output. On top of all of this, items such as stat potions / infusions have their own cooldowns and have a post-animation delay of about a full second, making them less than ideal for double weaving. As you can see, Final Fantasy XIV is much more fickle about its rules with the global cooldown. It has flashier animations, and the intricate skill use and weaving between the global cooldowns can absolutely be interesting. However, WoW's skills are faster and more reliable in a tightly timed situation. With Final Fantasy XIV, this also means that the pace of combat is on average slower, including the rate at which bosses use their skills, compared to World of Warcraft, where bosses benefit from equally as quick skill usage of the players. This leads to requiring what I feel is much faster reactions in World of Warcraft, whereas in Final Fantasy XIV, it's more about reacting to the skills in such a way that you can safely perform mechanics between global cooldown uses. On top of that, in Final Fantasy XIV, the developers are anything but shy in throwing 2, 3, even 4 mechanics at you all at the same time, because you just happen to have more time to react than you'd otherwise expect. This can lead to some really visually impressive boss fights, but it can also lead to some deeply frustrating moments. The one thing I see frustrate a lot of new players is that a boss's animation of executing a skill doesn't line up with the end of their cast animation. Basically, they have an AoE on the ground, they finish the entire cast bar, then the AoE on the ground disappears, then they perform the action. So visually, it can look like you were nowhere close to being hit, but if your character was inside of the circle before that animation started going off, then you're gonna get hit. Now, I could just keep going back and forth here to be honest, but ultimately, each one has its pros and cons depending on the type of player you are. Obviously, I'm the type of player who prefers Final Fantasy XIV's combat system, as I've stuck with it for all these years, but regardless of which game you play, hopefully this video helped either the World of Warcraft players understand 14's global cooldown, and if you're a 14 player, hopefully you maybe understand how World of Warcraft's global cooldown works a little bit better as well. Now, I don't know how people's perspective of pace will change should the World of Warcraft changes to the global cooldown skills actually go through to the live expansion launch. I mean, they're already backtracking on the movement skills, so who's to say that they won't backtrack on other aspects as well? Currently, it seems like, if I remember reading correctly, they'll add offensive properties to some of the other cooldowns. I can't remember, I think it was Bloodbath was one of the ones they mentioned, so that way you're not just pressing a button to then be able to make the buttons you press afterwards stronger. I don't know how it's going to turn out. There's still quite some time before Battle for Azeroth actually comes out. All I know is, ultimately, enjoy whichever game you enjoy. If you enjoy both, then awesome. All the more power to you. Anyway, thank you for watching the first in what should be quite a few videos in this series. I know stats on gear is another big one, the way that gearing actually works in both the games, what the patch cycle actually looks like, what kind of content is in each of the patches, differences in crafting and gathering. There's a ton of different things. Like, the games do almost every aspect of themselves individually completely different. So I expect quite a few videos in this series. But anyway, thank you. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.